for all verified facts. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello and welcome. What's the future of work looking like? Well, it depends. We've almost soon going to complete a year of COVID-19 and one way or the other. And it's not clear whether things are going to change, and if so, how, given that either a cure or a vaccine are not in immediate sight. So what happens to companies who've either planned for this kind of transition or not? What happens to people who thought of either creating a new life-work balance or perhaps were hoping that things would go back to the past? The only person perhaps you can pose this question to at a time like this is a futurist. So I'm delighted to be joined by Ben Hammersley, journalist, once upon a time technologist and strategic foresight specialist. Ben has worked in, among other places, the Times, at the Wired magazine. He's also a pilot, a wilderness medic, an ultra runner, and many more things. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Right. So Ben, I know that the last 7 or 8 months of COVID would have been, I guess, busy for you because everyone is trying to get a sense on which way the world is going to go. So that's my first question. I mean, as you look back, and I'm sure, I don't know whether your views have changed, but I'm sure other people's views have changed about the nature of work and the nature of workforce, even in the last 6 to 7 months. But how does it look today, and how does it look today looking ahead?
That's a very good question. I think the thing that has characterized the past 7 or 8 months has been that every prediction that we made about the future of work that previously we thought would take maybe 5 or 10 years happened in about 3 weeks, sometime in April. There has been this enormous acceleration of all of the changes that we previously knew about, we previously had discussed a great deal, but there were things that we thought would happen slowly. And because of the lockdown, because of the pandemic in every part of the world, we've seen a huge acceleration of change. So it's not so much that the changes are unexpected, it's just that they all happened extremely quickly. And that is the shocking thing. That's the thing that people have found very difficult, or at least the people I've been speaking to.
And my sense is that there are some organizations who were swift to respond in a manner that, or in a sense that they took this as an opportunity. And I've seen it in India with the large information technology companies who employ anywhere between 100,000 to 400,000 people, who said almost overnight. I mean, I know it wasn't exactly overnight, but we're going to use this to move into a 25% at work environment in by next year, for example. So that's one kind. And there must have been another kind, maybe who are more physical, who had no choice but to say that we can only wait for things to come back. And there must have been even others who would have said that maybe things will come back to what they were the day a vaccine is found or people are able to control this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's exactly right. I think you can look at different companies precisely by how quickly they moved and how decisive they were in their decision making. There were some companies, as you say, who saw this as an opportunity to accelerate ahead with plans they already had, or they were companies which never had these plans but realized they needed to have them very, very soon, and they acted as soon as they possibly could. And those companies, and especially the service-based companies who were able to move to remote working, to digitize all of their processes and then move to remote working as soon as possible, those companies are the ones who are still successful today. In fact, perhaps more successful than they were before. Then you have other companies who decided that they would wait for things to go back to normal. And you can characterize those companies as the ones who've gone bankrupt now, or the ones who are about to. Because there are two things we've learned. The first is that things didn't go back. And second is that they will never go back. We can wait for a vaccine. We can wait for, global immunity. We can wait for behavior change to kick in. But that's going to be maybe another 6 months, maybe another year. There isn't enough time for those companies. And so we're seeing now, and especially around the world, I'm talking to you from New York, but really anywhere in the world, the companies that moved quickly and made the changes early are continuing to be successful, continuing to exist, and the ones who decided to wait, they're the ones who are suffering very badly. And then, of course, like you say, the people who require physical work or physical location, like restaurants and so on, again, it's the same thing. The ones who looked very deeply at their processes or looked very deeply at their offering and said, how do we make this work in a pandemic? They're still here. And the ones who decided to wait are the ones who are currently about to run out of money. They're the ones who are deep in debt. They're the ones who aren't paying rent anymore. And it's only through rent moratoriums and things like that they're still in business. But this time next year, they'll all be gone.
Right. So let me pick up on two of the points. So one is you're saying that this is the future, and this is the future that in some ways was in the offing for maybe 4 to 5 years, but except that it happened in 2 weeks. Now, why is that the case? Why is it that this is the only future and not something else, or not the old way of doing things? When I say old way, I mean in the context of work.
I think because so many things that we do for work and so many things we do in the rest of our lives, we do mostly out of habit, and we do them out of inertia. We do them out of momentum. It's the thing that we've always done, and we get up every day and we do that thing, and then we go to bed and we get up the next day and we do that thing again, and so on. And that's true for personal practices. It's true for corporations. It's true for just cultures in general. And what the pandemic did everywhere in the world is it forced everybody to stop. And when people stop, they then reassess what they've been doing before. And you can see this in really everything. So whether that's virtual working made people reassess the commute that they had to work. So for example, I've done work with clients in California where they would daily, drive 3 or 4 hours a day to go to the office and come home again. And then as soon as they started working from home, remote working, they no longer had that commute. And if you speak to them now, they will universally say there is no way they will ever go back to doing that commute again. It's just that they've done it out of habit. They've done it out of momentum. And when everybody is forced to stop, reassess the world, then people make those changes. And we can see that in everything from the world of work, but even things like air pollution. The famous pictures from towns in India where the factories were closed because of the pandemic, and suddenly you could see the hills 100 miles away. You could suddenly see a blue sky. If you went back to the people who live in those cities and say, okay, we're going to go back to normal, so everybody prepare yourselves because we're going to go back to having a dirty atmosphere again, that's a very difficult conversation to have. And it's the same thing in the world of work. If you're a boss and you're telling your employees now, okay, we're going to go back into the office and we're going to restart doing all the things that you have now realized actually were terrible, that's a very, very difficult conversation. And it's a conversation that people aren't having because there is a joy in reinventing the things that you've done out of habit because you don't really remember why you're doing them in the first place.
That's interesting. So let's take some best case examples. The new Apple campus, the new Google, some of the Google offices, the Googleplex. All of those represent, let's say, the cutting edge in terms of workplace environments. A lot of design thought, in terms of creating collaboration, in terms of obviously, bringing high quality talent and everything else that goes with it, including the great food. But now, all of this, you're saying that people will somehow manage to maybe motivate themselves to do at home. Not everyone will, but many people could. Is that something that's, do you see that progression naturally?
Yes, absolutely, because not everybody is Apple or Google. Sure, if you work for the 2 biggest corporations in the world, then yes, you can have the most beautiful headquarters in the world. But the vast majority of people don't work for those companies. They work for just regular organizations, and most offices are terrible. They're just not good places. They have bad air conditioning, bad furniture, and we're also realizing from a psychological point of view that a lot of office design is very bad. you said about collaboration, that's a very good point. There's been a feeling for 30 years that open plan offices, for example, increase collaboration, make you more creative. And that was a story that was sold by office furniture manufacturers here in the US. But if you look at any of the psychological studies, and there have been many psychological studies into this, what they find is that open plan offices actually are the worst possible places for collaboration and creativity. Because in fact they're incredibly distracting, and so nobody can have a thought that lasts for longer than a few seconds because there are too many people around you. And actually, the best thing for collaboration are single offices for where you are on your own for 4 days out of 5, and then on the 5th day you have intense, highly agendaed meetings with people who you're collaborating with. So that's a good example of how we know how collaboration, or we know how creativity, or we know how productivity works, and our knowledge of how that works is not reflected in the traditional office building architecture. So what we think of as being collaborative or creative is in fact not. It was actually just a con made by office furniture manufacturers and landlords who wanted to fit more people into a room than previously they could before. And now we've had this lockdown, and now we've had this great resetting and reassessment. We're now realizing that actually we can be more productive, we can be more creative, and in fact we can do better work if we're working from home and we don't have the commute and we don't have to put on trousers.
Right. So so the next question, and let me split it from the employer and the employee side. So from the employee side or the worker, many workers like to go to work because there is a social element to it, and there is, apart from the environment, maybe all offices are not so good, but some will be somewhere midway, and therefore there is a social calling, so to speak, to go to office, to mix with a different set of people, away from maybe a small condo or an apartment like we have in Mumbai here. And on the other side, you have the employers who are worried. JP Morgan said recently that they want people to come back because they feel that this is not this disaggregated way of working is not very productive. So from both sides, how do you see that panning out?
Well, so from the social side, I think that there will be other things which will take their place. So absolutely, of course, being social and being and all of those sorts of natural human elements to human psychology, they will be replaced by other things. You'll find your social interactions somewhere else. And in terms of the worry from the managerial class that if they're not constantly looking at their employees won't do good work, then that is just an indictment of the fact that either the work they're doing isn't good in the first place, I mean ethically or morally, or it's an indictment of the fact that they're terrible managers. If you are a leader who requires to have their eyes on their employees the entire time, you're a terrible leader. Whereas the most inspiring and the best teams are the ones who you can give your employees their tasks, you can give them their inspiration, you give them their project, and then you lead them to do it on their own. If you work for somebody who insists that they can always see you when you're doing your work, then that person is a terrible boss.
Yeah. So, we've talked about disaggregated workers, but could disaggregated workers or workforce also lead to fragmented? Because I heard you talk somewhere recently about people who suddenly realize that they have the whole work environment created in their homes, which is perfect to do work, and they're talented already, and they can use that talent for any number or many more employers. But my question is actually two parts. So one is what happens then to them, and which may be good, but from the other side, for an organization to manage a fragmented workforce, which is not fully plugged in, becomes a bigger challenge.
It does become a bigger challenge, and that's why the challenge is to give those workers a task or a challenge or a problem to solve, which is compelling enough that they won't wander off and work for somebody else. Again, this pushes the power, or as it were, the balance over towards the people with the actual talent who are doing the actual work. And if you find that your business is suffering because you are not retaining your employees. Your employees are using their remote working capability to go and work for somebody else who's giving them more money, or who is giving them better projects or more interesting problems or something like that, then again, that's your fault, right? It's this, and that in general is how innovation works. That's actually literally the driving force behind business growth or innovation, or just national development. If your cleverest workers continually head towards the more difficult problems, that can only be good for everybody, apart from the businesses who want them to solve terrible problems. But those businesses, there's no law that says they have to stay in business.
Right. So, Ben, if you were to now draw up the blueprint, so to speak, I mean, it's not even a blueprint, it is work in progress of the post-COVID organization, which is really somewhere in the middle of 2021 or towards the end of 2021. And, an organization that has or had several thousands of people, several hundreds to a few thousand sitting in HQ, and of course, offices in many parts of the country, and then the world, manufacturing outlets, warehouses, sales. How do you see all of this, developing? And both, again, from an organization's point of view as well as from the workers or workforce point of view?
I think it's a cultural change, which is that they can now push the decision making closer to the edges. They can push the decision making and the product development and the customer service and so on closer out, further out towards where the talent is. If you do that, then you become a much more successful, much more interesting organization who's able to provide a much better service to your customers. I think too many companies structure themselves around an org chart. They structure themselves around the nature of somebody has to be in charge, and that person has to have, 5 deputies, and each of those 5 deputies has to have 5 other reports under them, and so on and down, all the way down. And they structure their entire business around fulfilling the org chart, instead of structuring their business around fulfilling the customer need, or fulfilling the mission of developing the new thing, or creating the new technology, or whatever it is. If you are structuring your business, if you're structuring your entire organization around the leadership structure, then you're going to force people back into offices. You're going to force people into this rigid thing, because that's what it is. And what you're doing isn't business. What you're doing is theater. And it's a sort of ego-based theater around the leadership. But if you are structuring your business around fulfilling the business mission, which is always dealing with your customers and developing new products, then allowing that mission to spread all the way out to the edges, because you now have 100,000 remote offices. It's no longer about the location, it's no longer about the theater, it's about the service, it's about the development. Then those are going to be the successful companies. And we can see this. You mentioned Google and Apple before. Google is a good example of this. They said a few days ago that they are going to be having a hybrid model of most people will be working remotely until at least the end of next year. And so other technology companies, Twitter is another good example of that, they will be remote working forever. Sure, they'll have an office for some things, but the vast majority of people will be remote working, because it's not, the point of business is not to go to the office. The point of business is to do the business. And if it turns out you can do the business better somewhere else, then the office is just a tool which no longer fulfills the function that you bought it for, and so you can sell it or use it for something else.
How can organizations better anticipate the need of this new hybrid worker, or maybe just fully remote worker? I mean, people were always working remotely. I mean, it's not true in itself, but obviously now a much larger percentage is working and will be working remotely, or will work in this hybrid format. And some companies are, at least the examples that I know of, have also made it mandatory that you will spend 25% of your time in the year in the office. And of course, that will be worked out with your teams and your line managers and so on.
Well, I think this is part of the whole business reorganization problem, which is that to be able to best serve the employees who are working remotely, then everybody in the organization has to sit down and look at every single process that the organization, enacts, and work out how to make those processes work remotely. And one of the first thing you do before you do that is ask whether or not that process is necessary in the first place. You have to ask yourself, why do we do that anyway, right? Before you make it into a digital thing that can be done remotely, you have to ask yourself why. And I would take that question and I would ask it about the companies who are mandating 25% of the year you have to be in the office. And the question for that is, why? Why 25%? Why not 20%? Why not 30%? If it's important, why not 40%? If it's not important, why not 15%? And if it's not important, why do it at all? Like, what's the purpose of that? And so it's about asking those important questions of, like, why do we do this way? Why do we do this at all? How does this thing that we're talking about help us fulfill the mission that the business is set up to cater? And every business, whether you're talking about a massive, IT outsourcing business, or whether you're talking about a small 2-person, restaurant in the street, they have a mission that they fulfill. And they have to ask themselves, is this thing that we're doing now helping us to fulfill that mission? And for the vast majority of major corporations, enormous amounts of the things that they do doesn't actually help them fulfill the mission. It's just stuff that's grown like barnacles or something. It's just sort of grown on top of the core activities of the business. And what this pandemic has allowed us to do, and what this transformation to remote working has allowed us to do, is to look at all of those things and say, hey, all of this stuff that we were doing before, none of that was helping. None of that was relevant, actually. So it's not a point of how do we do that remotely. It's just, well, we just won't do that anymore. And that frees up those people to then fulfill the real mission of the business, whether that's customer service or product development or whatever else it is.
Right. Last question. So, as you've tried to gaze into the future, for example, in the context of workforce, what's the most unusual thing you've thought of, which perhaps is yet to happen or could happen, and what's something that you predicted which has completely happened in all that we are seeing today?
I think the most easily predicted thing that happened very, very quickly was the end of department stores here in the US. Department stores were generally terrible anyway, but once nobody was allowed to go to them for a while, once we were allowed to go back to them, nobody did, because we'd lost the habit in the first place. And so there are many sorts of types of retail, for example, which I think where that acceleration happened very, very quickly. And in terms of sort of curious ideas going forward, I think that we will see in the senior leadership of companies, and not so much the leadership so much as the most important employees, so like the head scientists, the most important engineers, those sorts of business critical, intellectual property, cognitive people. I think we're going to see those people being held almost in bubbles, that they will be placed into extremely nice housing and extremely nice areas and extremely lovely workplaces and laboratories and so on. But the biosecurity around those people will be extremely tight. We have a situation now globally where many, many world leaders, notably the President of the United States, have all been infected and are not doing well because of it. And I think in the future, for future pandemics, we'll have situations where corporations will look at their head of engineering, their head of development, their CEO, and say, as soon as anything starts to happen like a pandemic, those people will go into a biosecurity lockdown. And that will mean things like you will no longer ever be able to have an in-person meeting with the most important people in an organization, because they're too valuable to have in the business than to allow them to go and shake hands with somebody who hasn't washed their hands recently or something like that. So I think there will be, for the very, very extremely valuable people, there will be a weird sort of luxury prison for them. But which will keep them well and keep them healthy. And that has lots of knock-on effects around, say, business travel, for example. So if the most important people are never allowed to meet anybody else, they will have representatives who go and do the traveling for them. And those people are allowed to be ill. But they'll be the professional being ill people, and so I think, I'm pretty sure we'll start to see that very, very soon. That the most important intellects in organizations are not allowed out.
Right, absolutely. Last question, Ben. So, what's the one thing that you miss, either in and around Brooklyn, New York, or around from the pre-COVID days that you want to get back? I mean, it could be a pizza for all.
No, the pizza is still very good. I miss the travel, and I miss sort of sitting in pavement cafes and drinking coffee and watching the world go by. I haven't been on a plane since the end of February, and this is the longest I've been in 20 years without traveling. I haven't had jet lag in 8 months, and that feels very strange, I have to say. And hotel breakfasts. I miss a hotel breakfast, but we'll be back to that pretty soon, I'm sure.
Right. On that note, Ben, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights on what promises to be a fascinating, if not challenging, future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.